And welcome. I'm wearing an X-Men shirt and you're dressed like Bogey. Welcome to Generation Movie on a Monday night in February, the beginning of February, the beginning, of course, of our Oscar Decade Cavalcade for 2024. This is, of course, is a thing we do on our show that highlight the upcoming Oscars, which is the 96th Academy Awards, by paying tribute to past Best Picture winners of different eras. Last year we did 8. This week we're cutting it down to 5. This year we're cutting it down to 5. I think we did the right thing in a sense because we picked 5 very interesting to talk about films. And they all have a particular purpose that maybe we'll get to at some point later in this decade cavalcade, Rich Drees, and maybe people can try to guess what the thing is, and we'll give them something to think about and hope for. I'm going to preface this. You look like Bogey. I feel like Bogey. I feel like my guts were kicked in, as Bogey says in Casablanca. So I'm just saying this. Also, you'll notice my name. It says "Play It Again, Sam," because as everyone now knows, if you've watched the movie recently or if you've ever seen the movie, he never says "Play it again, Sam." And that's been one of the running jokes of people who get movie lines wrong, like "Luke, I am your father," or like these movie lines that appear to be real but aren't really movie lines. Every Star Wars fan knows it's not "Luke, I am your father." It's "No, I am your father," right? So, but "Play It Again, Sam" is a funny one. We're going to talk a little bit about Casablanca tonight, which is one of the greatest films ever made.
I dare say the "Play It Again, Sam" thing stems from Woody Allen's play turned into a movie.
Yeah, well, but it's become one of those. It's become one of those Mandela effect things, right? Where you get something wrong, but it's like it's wrong because you remember it in your memory wrong. But we're going to talk about that. We got some other news and business to deal with first. Let's say hi to everybody who's in the chat early. Happy birthday, Joe. Yes, Joe Ridgely of the Indie Escape Network is older today. Happy birthday, Joe.
Oh, my goodness.
Thank you, Jamie Hill. Good evening, gentlemen. So much cool stuff coming up. Rich looks amazing. Yeah, that implies that Rich looks amazing and I don't, and that's fine. Well, you do. You do look amazing. Thank you, says Joe. Good evening, friends. Good evening, Ken McKernan. Good to have you. Happy birthday, Joe. Thank you. And then Rich looking like Inspector Gadget. Wow, that hurts. That's got to
totally
be
wrong
hurtful.
type of hat for Inspector Gadget.
Yeah, it's also totally wrong color. It's gray. Inspector Gadget is gray, not. I saw at least 3 of them yesterday at MegaCon. Let's get that out of the way. We'll have something up in a couple of days of different things cut together. I've been incredibly under the weather the last 2 days. But MegaCon and the Indie Escape Network at MegaCon was a success. We're going to talk about some of the things that we viewed. I was I was at an Alan Tiddick panel, and basically, he had some really interesting things to say. He's a really great character actor of our time, and he was incredibly funny as you would expect him to be. We also some of the best costumes at Comic-Con. There were 2 girls that will be uploaded on the Indie Escape Network page. Okay. They were playing the characters from the E.T. ride at Universal. E.T.'s friends. And it was they were 2 things. They were first off, my nephew Jacob loves the E.T. ride. It's the only ride we have to go on every time we go to Universal. Bar none. Great ride. It's fun. It's still fun. It has a weird smell. Can't get past the smell. The bikes are cool. It's one of the coolest old-timey rides you'll ever go on. But there are characters in it when you go back to E.T.'s Green Planet that he has to revive them with his finger. Take whatever you want with that as you will. And then he has to meet his friends up. And one of the things that was part of the game of the original ride was realizing who his friends were by their names and calling them out as you pass them. And so these 2 ladies were dressed up as perfect representations of the Green Planet characters that are E.T.'s friends that help him save the Green Planet. And I will get that up, I promise. Other news we have to tackle. We talked about it a little bit when we did a review this week, but we lost somebody important. We lost Carl Weathers this week, And as I'm looking through things and as I'm trying to figure things out, he was a lot of things for a lot of people. Like, Apollo Creed is a lot of people's first kind of reactions to a villainy bad guy that isn't all that bad himself, right? A bad guy that is maybe against your favorite Rocky, but he also has problems and issues and everything that makes him decidedly human. So he's the first villain.
He's an antagonist, but he's not
evil.
Outright. Yeah. He's just
and
an
I think
obstacle.
he's an obstacle, right? And I think it's, in Rocky, you get a little picture of him and he's really arrogant. Rocky 2, he's chasing the legend of Rocky and Rocky. He's chasing both of them. And it's kind of an interesting performance. But he was his death in film one of the greatest ever put on film. He goes in what's supposed to be an exhibition against Ivan Drago, and he gets his lunch handed to him and is murdered by Ivan Drago. And what's, Rocky's on the top of the steps ready to throw the towel in, and, he begs him, don't do that, because he wants to get back in the ring. And then then he knocks him the fuck out. And that it's one of the greatest deaths. It's also one of the more traumatizing deaths for people, because it was the first time in a major, it was the first time in the Rocky franchise, aside from the death of Mickey, where, the death was like an outlier for Rocky. You know what I mean? But it's a great death. It's an astounding death that changed a lot of people's lives. He also died in this movie called Predator. And he's great in Predator. He is another one of those persons not telling all of the truth all of the time. He's a CIA operative that tasks Schwarzenegger's group to go in and rescue a bunch of army men who they don't know what happened to them. And when shit starts to fall apart, he doesn't, he never gives up what he is or what he's doing. And he also has a very vicious kind of, humbling death, because none of the other major people get deaths quite like his death. Both arms cut off, fully upright with both nubs kind of waving in the wind. So he was a great actor. He was an amazing thing. And then for a new generation, not us, but for a new generation, he made his mark in the Star Wars universe, playing a guy that was very good friends with the Mandalorian, and gave him bounties and did all kinds of stuff. Eventually becomes a governor, right? And but played it with a panache that you just don't always get from 60-year-old actors in their third franchise. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes we get older actors in franchise stuff, Rich, and they're okay. They're not great. He was great. He was fun with the Mandalorian. He was, it was a good match. And he will be sorely missed in that regard. I think as an actor,
they gave that character some meat for him to play with and make a stew out of. Even it was just like a really nice character arc, like you said, from a guy who farms out bounties to this redemption where he's actually a good guy governor now of this small
building
town.
building up the small town and trying to protect the small town no matter the cost, and trying to keep everything controlled and flow. It was a really good arc for him. And when we get to the Mandalorian movie or the Mandalorian the next season, whatever happens first, they're gonna have to address it, and they're gonna have to make it great, right? It's gonna have to be great.
Honestly, I think if there's no good story reason for Mando. I mean, yes, Mando is kind of living on the outskirts of that town.
That's what I mean. I think one of the things that could come up is Grief.
Hey, we need you. He doesn't have to swing by Grief Karga's office to say, "Oh, by the way, I'm heading out now," or anything like that. He can just go.
You don't know if it's going to happen.
Necessarily have to do something.
That's fair. Okay. But Carl Weathers will be missed.
Then try to do something bad.
Ham-handed. Okay. Yeah, that's fair.
with.
Carl Weathers will be missed. You know what was also missed recently, Rich? The box office is missed. We had a movie open this week called Argyle with these two great people, Bryce Dallas Howard, Sam Rockwell, these other great people, Henry Cavill, Dua Lipa, and John Cena. And it's an original work. And what happens when we have original work, Rich?
People stay home in droves.
Yes. This movie grossed, these are the headlines surrounding the box office. Argyle's opening weekend box office numbers are in, and it's not great news. And this is from one of the articles. The movie underperformed at the North American box office, opening to $18 million against a $200 million budget, according to The Hollywood Reporter. Overseas, it opened at 17.3 for a total of 35.3. Worldwide, that is not good enough. That is not strong enough. And what we said on this show, and this is a bigger problem, bigger picture, right? We hear a lot of people on our show who comment like, why don't they make new movies? Why don't they make original movies? Why are we getting retreads? Why are we getting reboots? Why are we getting remakes? And this kind of box office result, Rich, isn't this the reason? The reason now, if he called this The Kingsman Argyle, or if he called it, something where it had a sequel, kind of, at least they would have been able to do something. Maybe, you know what I mean? But it's a bad news equation thing. You can't say you want new things. You can't say you don't want remakes or reboots or retreads or, sequel, rebootquels or whatever, right? You can't do that. And then when somebody releases a new movie with no attachments to anything, not show up. Because it's a big, loud, dumb, fun movie that isn't great, but isn't 18 million at the box office bad either. Do you know what I mean? And so I just think it's a weird. We're in a weird position where everybody seems to say we don't want reboots or remakes, but every time something new comes out, we shun it and we push it away.
I still have to think that this is partly because the pandemic trained people to wait for streaming, and that's been a problem for just about most films that would normally pre-pandemic have had a packed audience, theaters for weeks. Some Marvel stuff. And
there's no real set.
This movie's done probably about 75 to 80 million pre-pandemic. It feels like to me, but 8 as opposed to 18 million. People, go, oh, it's an Apple movie. It's probably going to be on Apple in a couple of months. Nah, screw it. I'll wait.
I'll be honest with you. I didn't know it was an Apple movie going in.
Oh, really?
I did not know. And the Apple thing came up and I just heard I heard a couple groans in the audience. I could have waited for this. Do you know what I mean? And you're right. I think something has to do with that, but it also has to do with the idea that for studios, marketing, and for whatever, making things that people know are what they want to see. And that derives from seeing things that they've already seen. And so, we're stuck in this weird rut. And every once in a while we have an Oppenheimer or a Barbie. But for the most part, we don't have Oppenheimers and Barbies. No. Right? And so the idea that you're waiting on that or waiting on that concept, we're going to have historical dramas up every year, right? Killers of the Flower Moon didn't make as much as it made in theaters because it was on Apple, so people waited. Napoleon probably didn't make as much as it because they were waiting for Apple. And that's where we're at. It's, do I need to go see the 3-hour movie or should I wait to see it in theaters? This movie runs long, so I can't imagine people sitting there going, it's 2 hours and 20 minutes. That's plus trailers. That's 240. You know what I mean? And I just think that we're in a weird place. The pandemic has hurt theaters possibly beyond repair, almost pushing them to remember that conversation that everybody points to with Spielberg and Lucas? I think it was at USC where they sat down and they said, just so you know where movie theaters are headed, they're headed to special events, movies that are going to play for months, and it's going to be one movie and it's not going there's not going to be a lot out. and you're going to have all these theater chains that shorten the amount of boxes they have in a theater, you know, and every single day they get a step closer to being right, which I don't want them to be at all. So I'm bummed about this.
Obvious. But I don't know. I think the studios themselves can kind of alleviate this problem by opening up that window again. We're down to like sometimes it's just like 17 days after a movie is in a theater, it's on a streaming service, when it used to be 90 days at the earliest. And if these studios, which are realizing these streamers are not necessarily the cash cows that they thought they were going to be, they're going to have to start realizing, it's like, crap, if we want to stay in business, we need to lengthen that window back.
We need the movie theater window back. We need that window. Yeah. But again, that's a negotiated contract right now. Universal is one of the ones that made contracts with all the different companies that if a movie doesn't hit a certain amount of money, it's on Peacock after 17 days, like you said.
Yeah.
So it's like a double-edged sword. It's also like the snake eating itself. Like, if our movie doesn't make as much money, it will be on this streamer. And it will only be on that streamer if it doesn't make as much money. It's like it's a snake eating itself, Rich, for God's sakes. But it's a problem we're going to continue to have. Joe wrote, "Hope you're feeling better, JW." Nope. Thanks for asking, though. I will have stuff for MegaCon up in the next couple of days, but it won't be like I can't promise anything just because I'm having trouble like just being me right now. So anyway, with that in mind, one of the things that can soothe the soul and one of the things that can make you feel better whenever you're feeling sick, for me, has always been a great movie while curled up in bed in a ball, decrying all the medications you're on. That happened to me today, Rich. And the movie we're going to talk about today is an amazing bit of cinema, really. A standard bearer. It's 1942's Casablanca. The sheer volume of people behind the camera that are part of this movie. Hal B. Wallace production. You have Michael Curtiz directing, and then directing some of the street scenes and stuff. In a weird thing, is Don Siegel, one of the action directors from the 70s, where you go, what?
Yes.
It's amazing. It's an incredible factoid that you find out.
Yep.
Well, it's an incredible factoid that you found out that last week. Can I tell you this really quick factoid I found out about the Twilight Zone? Because we're doing the Twilight Zone Redux on Loud and Nerdy. So we're going through all the Twilight Zone episodes. Ida Lupino, right? Okay, she did an episode of the Twilight Zone, the first season, called The 16mm Shrine. Okay? She does this movie, but then you dig in her history, she made all kinds of movies, all kinds of directorial movies, all kinds of productions. She produced horror films, film noir, romantic comedies. Like, she made a bunch of things. She was an incredibly impressive performer, aside from the actor, right? And then you find this factoid, Rich, and again, we're going to have some factoids about this movie as well, but you find out the factoid that she is the only actor ever to star in a Twilight Zone episode and direct a Twilight Zone episode.
Which one did she direct?
She directed The Faces, the episode with the greedy family. She directed The Faces, and it just blew me away because first off, female director in the 60s or 70s, and she's directing a mostly male-based show. Yeah, everything on that show is very male-based. And then not only does she act in one of the first 5 episodes, but she comes back later and directs. And nobody else did that. Not a soul. And so it's just one of the more incredible factoids. But this movie has factoids as well. This movie has incredible things that I'm so excited about that particular factoid. I did a deep dive on Ida Lupino afterwards. It's my mind gets like when I just go crazy about something. Anyway, production on this movie.
I think what's most interesting about this movie is it's based on an unproduced play called Everybody Comes to Rick.
Yeah.
They had sent it in to Warner's. Warner's got their hands on it. And the reader who sat down to read this play, to say to recommend whether they should pursue the material or not, sat down to read it on December 8th, 1941, the day after the Pearl Harbor bombing. Now, if they had picked this up like 2 weeks before, that all that material might not have landed in the same way with that reader, and they might have said, nah, let's pass on it. Instead, they say, it's kind of hokum, but it's sophisticated hokum, and this is kind of what I think we're probably going to need to do. Because at this point, Warner's was already pretty much anti-Nazi to begin with. They were one of the they've been termed prematurely anti-fascist by the FBI.
Wow, I can't imagine how times relive themselves.
They were doing movies like, I Married a Communist. I'm trying to remember Hitler's Children, I think, came out in 1942 with Benita Granville, which is an amazing and dark and frankly just horrific movie. And so, Warner Brothers said, yeah, okay, we'll do this. And a lot of the major plot points that we see in the movie now are lifted out of this thing, but there's still a lot of differences between the original unproduced play and what we see on our screens today. I think
part of the
so many writers.
There's a hodgepodge of writers on this movie.
Yeah.
The screenplay is by 3 people. It's based on the original thing. Everybody Comes to Rick. Was Murray Bennett and Joan Allison. So already it had 2 people. Then they bring 3 people in, and Julius J. Epstein, Philip G. Epstein, and Howard Koch get credit for the screenplay. But then every once in a while you read about different things, and here's Looking at You, Kid, for example. You go, oh my God, that's one of the best lines in the movie. Right? It gets said 3 or 4 times. Every time Bogey's got a very intense moment with Ingrid Bergman, he says it, or when he's cheering a drink or whatever, right? And you read that there are 3 writers, but they didn't come up with it. Bogart came up with it himself. And one of
the greatest closing lines in all of history was pretty much written by Hal Wallace himself when he was like, we need a good closing line. How about this? Let's call these guys back in to loop that dialogue like a couple of weeks after they wrapped.
Yeah, Louis, this looks like the beginning of a beautiful friendship. So many weird little things happen on this movie, right? You have
pages left, right, and center all the way through. If you ever clung to the idea of the auteur theory that the director is the author of a movie, this is one of the great arguments against that.
Against it, because Curtiz doesn't. That's one of the things. That's one of the most interesting thing is, right? So, from a production standpoint, there isn't an essential shot. There isn't a moment. There isn't anything created by the director where you go, that's a Michael Curtiz movie, right? Which is really interesting. And then you realize that one of the hallmarks of Michael Curtiz movies was that he allowed actors to kind of find their places, right? And so he believed in the big thing of what's on the page is what we do unless we find something better, right? And so it's a real interesting thing. It is against auteur theory, but what if, the backlash I think towards that is, can you have auteur theory where the auteur just lets a film move?
Happen.
Yes.
I don't know.
Where
he's know about that.
Yeah. Well, no, but I think
you're right that Curtiz's style was having no style, really. And
yes, and I think it's a real interesting thing. It works immensely for this movie.
Yeah.
It works immensely for this movie. This movie works because there aren't too many, fingers in the pie. You know what I mean? It's just
there are way too many fingers in the pie because you had a bunch of different writers doing some polishing on certain scenes and stuff like that through. If the Writers Guild was doing arbitration at the time and people wanted to really fight it, it could have been really ugly and messy. But I don't think that they were. I think the main arbitration, way we get to find.
I think you're right. Listen to this. Listen to this. Some of this stuff. Philip Epstein, against the wishes of Warner Brothers, left at Frank Capra's request to work on Why We Fight. So Epstein walks away, right? Another writer comes in, Howard Koch. He writes 40 pages, 30 to 40 pages. We don't know which 40 pages he polished or whatever. When the Epstein brothers come back from working for Frank Capra for a month and a half, they're reassigned to Casablanca again. And contrary to what Koch had, Koch has claimed that, he wrote 30 to 40 pages of the movie, but in reality, his work wasn't used. The Epstein brothers and Koch never worked together. They never worked in the same room at the same time during the writing of the script at all. And in the budget of the film, the Epsteins were paid $30,000, equivalent to about $400,000 today, and Koch earned $4,200, equivalent to about $59,000. So there is something there. And then the idea that Bogart had a certain je ne sais quoi going on with the audience, with directors, with whatever, is amazing because in the middle of this, and it has to be discussed, Paul Heinried is cast as Victor Laszlo, right? And if you look at the top of the Casablanca poster, which I showed you earlier, you'll see that he is part of it. And as you know, I love fights, Rich. I love fights on movies. Bogart, Bergman, Heinried are all at the top of the Casablanca poster. And to say that Paul Heinried and Humphrey Bogart did not like one another is a massive understatement. At one point, there's talks in certain, if you look into certain rumors and whatever, at one point they're fighting about either the end sequence where, Laszlo gets arrested, right? In his bar, and they're fighting or having an issue, and they stop rolling the cameras, and he calls Bogart a mediocre actor. Just another American mediocre actor. At which point he calls him a prima donna. You're a prima donna who can't carry a picture. So the idea...
To be fair, he's fairly wooden in this movie. It's the thing that Heinried would later say is he was forced into being a stiff in this movie. The thing he would later say in interviews and he, as the third wheel in one of the greatest romance movies of all time, it's real hard to be the third wheel. And so you lash out at people like writers or Bogart or anything to not, and the thing is he always claimed that Curtiz felt he needed to be wooden, he needed to have a stiff upper lip. And so that's how he played it. And then he got polished off as some piece of wood, and everybody loves Bogart. It's like, well, I have news for you, buddy. Everybody loved Bogart from the beginning. Like Bogart was Bogart. You know what I mean? Although this performance is one of his better, nuanced performances. Kind of performance where legend becomes fact, print the legend performance, right? And so I love infighting. I love it when it's petty. It was incredibly petty behind the scenes. You also, again, had the weird place where this film was shot entirely on location at the Warner Brothers lot, right? The entire production. Initial filming date was April 10, 1942. Started on May 25th. It lasted until August 3rd. It was $75,000 over budget for a total cost of $1.03 million, Rich, which is equivalent to about $14 million today. Above average, way above average for the time. Right. Way above average for 1941. And usually the film was shot out in sequence as opposed to out of sequence, mainly because they were still working on the script. This is one of the rare films that's amazing. Not entirely true, because the first day of shooting was some of the Paris flashbacks, and they sort of knew where things were going by the end, because even by the time we see Victor and Ilsa in their hotel room after he escaped from that meeting, and they're looking down, they're seeing, the Nazi spy around the corner and stuff like that. They had already decided on how the ending was going to play out. They might have been still working on polishing some of those pages, but some of that, it wasn't entirely in order, in story order, maybe in broad strokes, but like
chronological
I said,
order, maybe.
First day of shooting was the Paris flashback, which come about an hour into the movie. So,
then also the other thing we have to look at, this is also one of the rare older movies where there were height concerns for actors, correct? This Bogey was considerably, not considerably shorter, but probably an inch shorter than Bergman at the time. So they had to film him in higher seats. So he got like a kid seat cushion kind of thing. And also he was wearing wooden blocks in some of the scenes where they're canoodling together. And so that's always interesting. I think also one of the more famous scenes, right? Is the background of the final scene where it's a Lockheed Model 12 Electra Jr. airplane with personnel walking around it. Of course, the personnel in that sequence are little people because they were fogging it up to try to make it look like a real plane when in reality it was just a flat piece of wood that was made to look like the plane that was leaving at the end of the movie. That's one of the
literally out one of the stage doors to look like a hangar.
Yes,
and some light.
But it's incredible. The stuff that comes from it is amazing, right? The stuff where you sit back and you just let things flow out of whatever is kind of it's an amazing production. So as production ends, they decide to release the film. We get into
it's nice when they do that.
It is nice when they release a film.
Warner Brothers don't always have a history of releasing films that they make, but
they're well, not recently at least is the case. We have a person who watches a lot of our shows who is a big Zaslav fan, and I don't understand it. He fights with me every single chance he gets about how Zaslav's doing the right thing on everything, and it's like, okay, if I can't change your mind. Actually, you know what? I'm sorry. Let's go back to production for a second. Can we talk about a movie having better music for its time than this movie? The music, the soundtrack is pretty special. It's almost integral. You know what I mean? Max Steiner, of course, did the thing. He wrote scores for King Kong, Gone with the Wind. The song As Time Goes By, of course, was by Herman Hopfeld. And it was part of the, from the moment of the original play on stage, that was the music that was part of it.
Now, Steiner didn't want that song in there, though. He was like, you know what? It's kind of a shitty tune. Let me write something new. And by the time he got around to writing something new, Ingrid Bergman had already moved on to her next project and had cut her hair. So every scene that they would have needed to reshoot where she mentions the new song, they couldn't shoot. So Steiner was like, okay, I guess I'm stuck with this As Time Goes By thing. And
I'm stuck with it. Thank God we're stuck with it.
So incorporated it so well that it's just an incredible motif. It's almost not a musical theme, but it's a theme of the movie itself. It works so damn well. It works when it's used in its scenes. This is another part of the production where, whoever made the direction choices, right? Whoever, picked the choice of when to use it, where to use it. It's strategically placed, as, a moment when Elsa first comes to Rick's. Or it's also used in a moment where they're all getting ready to flee France, right? And it's It's an amazing moment because, Bogey's gathering glasses and he brings it over and he's just, it's, what we all have, after seeing the movie and watching the movie and seeing the movie for years, we know what's going to happen to Bogey, but he doesn't know. And he doesn't know that this song is going to be like a Pavlovian response
to Love, right? This song coming on is him kind of just like throwing up a bit and just don't ever play it again, right? But I think one of the most imperative things in this production was that they chose to use the music they did, and also doesn't hurt if you have somebody as talented, playing Sam, incorporating him into everything you can get him into, right? Incorporating and using him to the point where it's like you just use him every chance you get. You know what I mean?
Dooley Wilson's amazing here, and it's kind of amazing that he has such a strong presence in this movie when usually this kind of a amount of screen time for a black character would really impact the movie being shown in the South. A lot of people just wouldn't have gone to see it, or they would have tried to find ways to cut out his part. Or if you notice a lot of films from this time that do have like black characters, if they have a musical number, it's very separated from everything else, which makes it really easy to just go take it out. And,
but he's all over the movie. He's all over the movie.
But yeah, he's such an integral part of this movie, though, that I've not been able to find too much discussion about it. But I do have to wonder, how did this play in the South? And did this impact people in such a way that they started to rethink, their own attitudes? We just had seen
the idea that you find out at the end of the movie is he's got 25%. He's got 25% of the cafe at the end. You find out.
Yeah.
When the services get sold and is sold, I assume it's probably 10%, but he's worth 25. Mm-hmm. And the idea that this guy is as big a part. Actually, that's another thing about the bit performers. The bit performers are every bit as part of this movie as anything. You have fantastic performances from Claude Rains. You have fantastic performances from Sidney Greenstreet and Peter Lorre in very smaller roles than they would play in The Maltese Falcon, of course. But it's a really great cast that just blends everything together to the point where Rick's Cafe Americaine is a real place. And it becomes like this real place where there is desperation at every corner. Every conversation at every table is a illumination into the mind of what's happening to someone somewhere who's being mistreated. You know what I mean? Okay, just want to talk about that. Sorry, I forgot it. Again, I'm out of my game tonight.
Okay, another thing about that too is I think there's only maybe 4 American-born actors in this movie, and everybody else in the cast is either from Europe, or mostly are from Europe, and they're refugees from the war. Some were British-born actors, like Claude Rains. And I think that brings a great verisimilitude to the idea of almost all the characters here, including Rick, and including are refugees themselves who found themselves in Casablanca for whatever reason. So I think that brings such an authenticity to everything that when people are expressing these frustrations that you just mentioned, that's real. That's real to them. They're not just acting that or trying to come up with I remember this one time I was frustrated, trying to do whatever. They're expressing their actual feelings right there. And I think that's what makes this movie so emotionally powerful, especially in the sequence where the Germans start singing the German national anthem, and Laszlo is just like, screw that. We're singing La Marseillaise.
The French stuff. Let's go.
Yeah.
And you're right. There is an incredible verisimilitude to the movie. And again, if Curtiz is working on being the director that has no style, it perfectly works for this movie.
And Curtiz is a refugee himself. His, he had been in Hollywood at that point, I think 10 years or something like that. And his English never got great. But even when I watch that now, and they cut to Yvonne singing La Marseillaise, even after she'd been palling around with a German soldier just to piss Rick off, and her eyes are filled with tears. That gets me every time. The power of those performances, because
I'll tell you the part that got me this time, and we'll talk about it later, but the part that really you don't think about a lot, that whole sequence where Claude Rains is plotting to have sex with the girl. And Rick specifically goes into the roulette room and makes sure that her husband has enough money so that she doesn't have to have sex with Claude Rains.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's like, I'm going to come in tomorrow night with a blonde. It better not be the same. But that sequence, it so illuminates Rick as a character. Like I can peddle in bullshit too, but if you're this person appears too innocent to me to do this to, so I'm going to make sure that my trickery outduels your trickery. So he's kind of like in a way he's, we're going to talk about when we get to Legacy, but in a way he's like very much a legacy character for a lot of people. Bogart is somebody that a lot of actors that we grew up with thought about, right?
Yes.
Okay. So it comes out.
I want to hit on that character actress there too. That was Joy Page. She was the stepdaughter of Jack Warner, the studio head. So one ballsy maneuver to have to play a guy who's like looking to seduce your boss's daughter for a role. And I also think she was the last living cast member from this movie. And she passed away in, I think it was 2008. Yeah, 2008.
So we're a long way off from this movie.
Yeah, which kind of bums me out. We'll admit.
It does. When that shit happens, like Carl Weathers dying it's just it's sad.
Yeah.
Okay, so the movie gets released. It was initially started for early 1943. But they would later work with Operation Torch, which was the capture of Casablanca, and the United States government and other places. And it was originally general release on January 23rd, 1943, which took advantage of something called the Casablanca Conference, which I didn't, at some point you don't know exists until really recently. A high-level meeting in the city between British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt. The Office of War Information prevented the screening of the film to troops in North Africa, however, believing it would cause resentment among Vichy's supporters in the region. And that's the other thing. This movie gets released in the middle of a war effort. It also has various cuts around the world. So there's an Irish cut, there's a German cut, there's all these cuts. And the German version is 25 minutes shorter than the American version. Because basically all of the Nazis had to be cut out. Every Nazi.
That's only because the movie was released finally there in 50
75.
51? So
75. A German version of Casablanca with the original plot and everything was not released until 1975. And so you have this whole, the things that were cut out in the German cut were the idea. Victor Laszlo isn't a concentration camp person. In the cut the Germans saw, he was a Norwegian atomic physicist who was being pursued by Interpol after he broke out of jail. So I can't even imagine watching a screen of the movie without the Nazis hanging over everything, without the Nazis like the German car that pulls into France every 5 minutes when they're in the Paris sequence and it's like, hey, we're getting closer. Hey, we're getting closer. Right, and it sets up the whatever, you know what I mean? But it as a movie, by the way, we should also preface it cost $1 million to make. The total domestic box office of Casablanca in 1942 or 3 is $10.4 million. Rich, that's a lot of coin in 1943. It's 10 times its budget. Its budget is 1.03. It grosses 10.4. It's 10 times its budget, which is an astounding amount of money in pre-war You know what I mean? Like right in the midst of everything. So people were definitely, keeping pennies. You know what I mean? Pinching pennies, doing whatever, war bonds, all those things. The idea that this movie grossed 10.4 million, and the idea that we have a American who's a prominent force of something in Morocco, right? It's one of those things where you look at the box office and go, this must have hit the fancy for everyone. It must have been playing in theaters for months. You know what I mean? Just people pinching their pennies and going every week. You know what I mean? Something we will never get to see in these days. If Casablanca was released now, it would be on Max in a week. And Zazzle would be like, "Can we put it back for tax purposes? Can we?" But the idea that it grossed 10.4 million is an astounding premise. It's a testament to, in a time when people weren't super wealthy, going to this movie so many times. Because you're thinking, probably 6-cent tickets in 1943? 6-8-cent tickets?
Yeah, maybe a dime.
And so it's a testament to that. And then we get the responses. As the movie comes out, and we're going to delve into it right now, critic response then and now. It is, as I was watching it today, Rich, all I could think to myself is, if you are building a historically based romantic melodrama, and you don't take this as some sort of blueprint on how to do so, you are an idiot. You're a complete moron, a complete tool. Because this movie works on fundamentally like personal level issues. I think Casablanca as a city where all these refugees are, as they pan around the city scenes and pan around the cafe, deals happening at every table. You know what I mean? There is an overwhelming sense of just desperation everywhere in this movie. And it's desperate for Rick and Elsa. It's desperate, Rick for Elsa is desperate. Laszlo for his way, like trying to beat the Germans, is desperate. Some people are just desperate to make money, like Claude Rains and Sidney Greenstreet and Peter Lorre. Other people are desperate trying to get to the United States. The young couple I talked about with the roulette table. The desperation is so overwhelming watching this movie, as like you're watching it and you just get engulfed by it. And then the stars show up, and as the stars show up, Bogart is great. Ingrid Bergman is luminous. You can't, like Roger Ebert once said of her, she's painting him with her eyes. The way she looks at Bogart in this movie is stunning. You can't replicate it. You can't do anything about it. She's a star, but he's a star also. And when she looks at him, it's two stars looking at each other. And then that's magic. That's movie magic. That's how we get blueprints for other movies, is when movies like this happen, right? And then you add the incredible plot with the Germans trying to take over Vichy France area, and you get
Vichy France was pretty much an ally of Germany. They're the ones who kind of just rolled over and said, "Okay, we'll do whatever you want, Germany."
Whatever you need.
So it does kind of make the idea that letters of transit signed by General de Gaulle, who was leader of Free France, would hold any kind of weight whatsoever, is ridiculous on the surface. If you really stop to analyze a lot of the plot points that this movie hinges on, they don't hold up at all. But the movie makes such an emotional sense of these actors and these stars and what they bring here. Everything feels emotionally true. That all this stupid MacGuffins, every single thing that doesn't work on a logical sense, it's fine. Don't care.
It is a melodramatic masterclass, right? It's all good melodrama. There's not a point of it where you go, "Oh, that's bullshit. Nobody would ever pick that." Like when Rick sends Elsa on the plane at the end of the movie, when he sends her, you sit back and you go, after all the things you've seen in the movie, you start putting it together and you're like, yeah, he could have had her, but she wouldn't have been happy. And Victor Laszlo needs her. Because if Victor Laszlo doesn't have her, Victor Laszlo is maybe half the person he is. And so Rick becomes the ultimate survivor. I can live without you, but your husband can't live without you. And you can't live without me, but you're going to have to go with your husband. Which is also a great way to get around any of the problems with any of the ratings brigades that were, make sure the woman goes with her husband. We don't want any of that. But I think the other thing about the movie is it's melodramatic, yes, but everything is to such a heightened crescendo, right? Even the roulette sequence is heightened because she comes to him and that the dialogue she says is incredibly profound. Like, Mr. Rick, if someone you love does something bad to make sure you can do something you really want to do, would you ever forgive her? And at that point, like, Bogart looks at her like, oh, fuck this. I'm not doing this. You're not going to do it. Like, and Bogart becomes this amazingly romantic figure, but also like a figure that's not only romantic, but
he maintains a certain mask of cynicism when he says, no one's ever loved me that much.
Yes.
I don't know. No one's ever loved me
how it would feel. Yeah, it's incredible, but it's also like it's to make sure that when we get to the final decision that Rick puts Ilsa on the plane, we know that he is willing to put his own things aside to make sure others are okay. And I think he has a bunch of them in the movie. Like, he has a bunch of them in the movie, like when he's talking to Sam or when he's talking to the two guys that work that make Rick's Rick, right? They get to stay on and they get their cut. Sam gets 25%. I think he's worth 10, but I'll pay 25. He's worth it. All of these things are all like where, and then even when he comes to like working with Louis at the end, right? They get Laszlo and Ilsa on the plane. Louis, this is making the beginning of a beautiful friendship. I'm not going to lie. This is the first movie of a classic movie where I wanted a sequel, right? Where you go, we'll talk about it in a second. Okay. We'll talk about it. I know we'll talk, but it's one of the very, very few times when you watch a classic movie where you go, there's more story here. I don't know what it is, but there's more story. And I think Bogart is so good in this movie. I recently watched Maltese Falcon because I'm watching Monsieur Spade on AMC. And Maltese Falcon compared to this movie, he doesn't have a lot of range. Like Maltese Falcon, it's very one note, but it's an incredible note. I don't want to say that, in a bad way. But in this movie, he has so many things going on. Also, we don't talk about Rotten Tomatoes too much, but we do use it as kind of a judge. This is a rare movie, Rich. It is 99% from critics, with 136 reviews. 95% at audience score with over 250,000 reviews. So if you watch this movie that's in black and white that everybody tells you should watch, and it is great. It is the way Ingrid Bergman looks at Bogart, the way Bogart looks at her, the way he says, here's looking at you, kid. When he says, here's looking at you, kid. And the final line of dialogue to her, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon, and for the rest of your life. If you don't get on that plane, you'll regret it, right? It's so indelibly marked into film history, but also when you watch it, your body reacts to it. It's a weird thing, Rich, right? When you're watching an older movie or a movie that or a movie that you've watched before. But these movies, some of these movies that we watch, Rich, they cause Pavlovian responses in us as movie fans.
Has there ever been a single scene in a movie that had that many quotable lines as that whole sequence does?
I don't think so. I think it's because they, part of it is that they were worried about whatever was all the different things, script configurations or whatever. But there's so many quotable lines in that scene. Round up the usual suspects, right? Yeah. General Sattler's been shot. Round up the usual suspects. Which in turn, we're gonna talk about it now. Which in turn a line as tiny and small as Round Up the Usual Suspects, legacy and franchise viability. Then you're going to talk about the sequel that could have happened. What I'm saying is, one of the interesting things about this movie is even the most minute of lines creates movies. Round Up the Usual Suspects, and then we have a movie that's called The Usual Suspects that becomes a classic. And this movie doesn't necessarily have a franchise viability because we never got sequels. But this movie, the legacy of this movie is every melodramatic romantic film you will ever see, the people they have to live up to is Rick and Ilsa, right? That's the legacy of this movie, is that no matter what romantic movie you see, you have to have them live up to Rick and Ilsa. And then on some rare occasions, we get that. We get The Notebook, right? That everybody loves, right? It's still one of those movies, Gosling and Rachel McAdams, James Garner, and, but you need, and whether it's super melodramatic or not, or Jenna Rollins, I should say, Garner and Rollins, it's part of this world. It's part of the world that Casablanca created. Talk about the sequel, Rich, because the sequel is one of the funnier, like the idea that we could have gotten a sequel.
There was two sequels. One was after this movie started to do really great at the box office, Warner's was like, hey, we should follow this up. And so there was a script treatment called Brazzaville that was written. And I've read it. It's okay. There's some bones there that they may have made something good, but it never would have equaled this. It never would have. It would just be, at its best, even if it was pretty good, it still would be a pale imitation of what we have here. Years later, and I can't remember exactly when this was. Was this in the
Wasn't
80s?
It Rick's Cafe Americain? Wasn't it? There was the TV series,
right? Which David Soul, which kind of a bit of a prequel to this. It was just that was okay. It ran on NBC for 13 weeks, and everybody promptly forgot about it. But it is available on DVD. I've not pulled the trigger on buying that, but it's been sitting in my Amazon wish list for about 10 years now. I know. And there's wasn't there also a book that came out called As Time Goes By? Yeah, that's it. Written by, I just pulled it up here, by Michael Walsh, that was published in 1998. And again, this also picks up after Casablanca, but it kind of goes in a different direction than that Brazzaville idea. And it goes into a lot of Rick's backstory in New York, which I don't want. I don't think we need. I kind of like him having a somewhat mysterious background. It adds to, the
mystique. It adds to the mystique of the movie. So a couple things I'll add to it. Unrealized remakes and sequels. So there was a great talk of a remake with Madonna doing a present day remake set in Iraq in 2008.
That seems terrible.
That sounds awful. The Entertainment Weekly also reported of efforts by Cass Warner, granddaughter of Harry Warner, and friend of the late Howard Koch, to produce a sequel featuring the search by Rick Bland and Ilsa Lund's illegitimate son for the whereabouts of his biological father. Also sounds awful. Then it was also Francois Truffaut was also offered a remake in 1974, saying, I'm going to pass. Like Francois Truffaut going, I'm good. And he wrote attempts to recapture the magic of Casablanca in other settings has always been prominent, such as Casablanca, which is a South American set retooling of Casablanca, and Havana, which has been, it's kind of a bad movie. Like I said, though, the problem with remaking, re-envisioning, I'll give you an idea I have. Like because one of the things that comes out of these legacy viability things, I don't think you do anything with Rick and Elsa. I think you stay as far away from them as possible. But if you were to do a Casablanca series where you're focusing on all the stories that are going on around them, where you get like one episode for every couple or one episode for every character, is something I could see somebody really good doing. You know what I mean? Like somebody who's really smart haven't needed, to do a background on these people. But the legacy of this movie is that it gives you the blueprint for a historical suspense movie. It gives you a blueprint for melodramatic tearjerker, right? Yes. It is the blueprint. It is the blueprint of a romance movie. It's got all the blueprint makings. And the idea that it's one of those movies that when you watch it, everything else pales by comparison. It's an amazing thing to be watching a movie that was made in 1942 and sit there and go, yeah, nobody's been close. Nobody's been close since. Jesus Christ. You know what I mean? Like, and the thing is, that's a great thing. One of the things that Roger Ebert said, and it's still great to talk about, right? Ebert said this. Where did I lost it? I fucking lost it. Jesus Christ.
Well, while you're looking for it, let me throw this out here.
Sure.
Howard Hawks said, a great movie is actually just 3 really good scenes and no bad scenes. That's a really good movie.
Yes, and he when he started getting it, when he was doing westerns, he also talked about the idea of 3 really good action set pieces and then a couple of character scenes around it. So when he started working on westerns and stuff, yeah. But he's right.
Yeah, this movie, definitely overloads itself with really great scenes. And everything is so iconic in this movie, from Rick, you've got to help me. Hide me, Rick. To the La Marseille scene, to the ending, to so many different character interactions, all with such great dialogue and everything.
The Paris cut sequence where they're driving, and then all of a sudden they're in the country, right? Yeah, and they're hugging in the car.
Anybody trying to remake this, it's a fool's errand because you can't improve on anything. The only reason you remake a movie is because you have a better way to approach the material, or an interesting different kind of twist on the ideas.
Or you're greedy. Or you're really greedy. No,
I'm saying the only reasons you should.
I'm looking at you, Tim Burton in Planet of the Apes. Looking at you. This is what Roger Ebert said, right? Roger Ebert said of Casablanca in 1992, years before his death, there are greater movies, more profound movies of greater artistic vision or artistic originality or political significance. But it is one of the movies we treasure the most. This is a movie that has transcended ordinary categories, in his opinion. The film is popular because the people in it are all so good, and it is a wonderful gem. Ebert also said that he had never heard of a negative review of the film, even though individual elements of the film can be criticized. Unrealistic special effects, and the stiff character of Laszlo as portrayed by Paul Henreid, right? I think he's right. It transcends everything. And the idea that you can watch a lot of romantic movies. There's a ton of romantic stuff on all these streamers we get, right? And none of it is the height of melodrama that this movie is. It is the blueprint. It is and the thing is, the reason it's the blueprint, but nobody can touch it, is because all the pieces that came through in the blueprint were the best products of the time, right? Bogart is Rick. Ingrid Bergman is Ilsa. Claude Rains is Louis. You know what I mean? Like, they hit it out of the park with all the casting. Hit it out of the park with the 7 different screenwriters. They hit it out of the park with Curtiz, willing to just sit there and let things happen. I don't make movies for shots. Curtiz had a comment once where he said, I don't make movies to impress people with how good my shots are. I just make movies where people are actually people. and it's a perfect example. And it's just one of those movies that when you watch it, and Joe brought this up as an interesting side note, when you watch it is almost as important as to where or who you watch it with or when you watch it. Cool segment with the movies you guys are reviewing, maybe the age you watch movies and hone in on them. I think that's interesting, but also I think, as you know, Rich and I are trying to be next generation of, you know, Rich already is, and I'm just trying to hop along on his ample raincoat coattails. You know what I mean? But it's one of those things. Every time you watch a movie like Casablanca, it's like watching it for the first time. You know what I mean? Like, you notice things. Like, I paid very little attention to the roulette scene until I realized how important the roulette scene is into establishing the choice he will make down the line. It looks just like he's just being a nice guy. And Louis says, I thought you were sentimental. I thought you were romanticized, right? And that's who Rick is. Rick has to make the right decisions. Ilsa tells him, you have to make the decisions for both of us. I don't know what I'm doing. He says, yeah, I'll make the decisions. Good. You know what I mean? And it's just a really well done film that shouldn't work, right? I mean, Rich, you and I watch movies like this all the time where it's melodramatic and it's campy. And
given the chaos of its production in terms of the writing, that this thing shouldn't work a fraction of the way it does. It's a miracle, and I'm very glad to have this miracle in our lives.
Yes, and like I said, I think it's one of those movies that when you watch it again or you relive it again, and you can't. I don't know how you feel about it. This is how I feel. When you watch it and it's happening, you can't believe how great the movie is. Like, you're sitting there going, I would like to find a flaw. Sometimes as critics, you and I sit there and go, I would like to find a flaw somewhere. Mm-hmm. This movie, whatever the flaws are, like 3 minutes in, they go right out the fucking window, right? You watch it and you go, I'm entrenched, I'm entombed. And the legacy of this movie is, maybe the ultimate legacy is filmmakers watching this and going, I want to be that great. I want to be that important to the history of film. And that's not a small thing to be amazing at, right?
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be Ilsa and Rick.
Yeah. I saw this for the first time when I was in high school at some point. We had just gotten a DVD player or a DVR player, VHS player when I was in a sophomore in high school. And so, like, those first couple of years, I spent a lot of time renting classic
stuff. Was it the really nice Casablanca box, the black and gold box?
No, it was that ugly clamshell.
Oh, no. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's when I discovered, probably like in my 20s.
My real appreciation for this movie came when I was in college. At our college radio station, I was part of a group called Radio Theater, and every week we put on radio dramas. A lot of times these were either adaptations of short stories or movies, or sometimes we did like sequels to stuff too. Like we did a Ghostbusters sequel once. But my sophomore year at Kutztown, for Radio Theater, for our premiere, we did a 2-hour premiere of adaptation of Casablanca. I wrote it over the summer, and I spent weeks watching and rewatching this movie, not just to get the dialogue right as I was transcribing and then changing things around a little bit to make it work as a radio drama, but just going back and forth. And I really got into that movie, got into my bones. And, and I understood it. I felt I understood it at a molecular level for this adaptation. But even now, 30 some years later,
finding stuff,
still watching it over and over again and seeing new things and finding new things and thinking about things and going, oh, that's interesting. I didn't really think about it this way before. That it's just one of these movies that constantly rewards rewatching. I
probably watched it when I was 15 or so, and it was one of the movies, like, as you get older, it was one of the movies my dad's like, you got to see. It was my dad's you got to see list. So you'd be complete. Like, like when I was younger, when I was coming out of movie theaters at like 15, 16, 17, I was having full on, confident adult conversations about movies that had come out. Right.
Yeah.
And at some point, my dad gave me a list that he sat down with me and said, you got to see Lawrence of Arabia. You got to see Casablanca. You got to see Citizen Kane. You got to see, like, it was on the you got to see list to understand what the power of movie making. And I can just say it's one of the all-time best films. It's got one of the all-time best hybrids. It's an amazing film. And it only won 3 Academy Awards in the year it won 16th Academy Awards. It won Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Screenplay. Who knew how that would have worked now with like the WGA and all the things that are happening. But this is just the first of our Oscar Decade Cavalcade. We've picked some really great movies to go over, and some movies that are not necessarily great, but they won Best Picture. So we'll figure them out as we go. Next week, we bring you this movie called The Greatest Show on Earth. It is directed by Cecil B. DeMille. It has Jimmy Stewart as a clown. It has Charlton Heston as a circus actor who may or may not wear a hat and leather jacket that are reminiscent of a famous archaeologist that we all know. But it is also the movie that was recently
dresses like that too, by the way.
Yeah, I know. And it also may be the movie in The Fabelmans that Spielberg talks about as the movie that got him interested in filmmaking. So we'll do that next week on Generation Movie. I'm super excited about it. It's a long movie, so if you're going to watch and get in on it, great, but sparse out your time wisely. Also, a couple things before I turn it over to Rich and what he's doing. If you are part of the Indie Escape Network and you want to be, or if you're creative and you have a new indie movie trailer or commercial, email it to us. We'll play it on an upcoming Indie Escape Network show. That's either Generation Movie or the new show we have premiering on Wednesdays, or the Sticky Microphone on Thursdays, or Loud Nerdy on Tuesdays. We'll do that all for free, just to get you hyped up and get a little bit of talk out for your movie. We are also Loud and Nerdy tomorrow night, Tuesday nights at 9. We have a big show for you tomorrow night. We are having the kids from NEPA Comic-Con on and Nerd Utopia. That's February 17th and 18th. We're going to have a fun time cosplay crew. This gentleman, Yali, and Richie Spidey Rivera will be joining us. They're big into this Comic-Con. We'll also be joined by Eric Cooper Nicky. I don't know how to pronounce his name. We'll have to get it for tomorrow night. And he'll be talking about Moon Ballroom, what the Moon Ballroom is starting to emphasize and show up in northeastern Pennsylvania as a place where people can have events and big events. He's on the tip of everybody's tongue. Eric is doing a lot of good work. We're super excited for them. Where can people find your stuff, Rich Drees?
All of my writing can be found at filmbuffonline.com, including some Oscar history stuff that we have coming up soon. We are also...
It is Oscar time, Rich.
Yep, you can follow Film Buff Online at facebook.com as well, where we always post links to all the new material as it goes up live. And we also have some Facebook exclusive things like history posts about things happening on that particular day in movie history. I do a second podcast with my good friend Natasha Bogutzki.
She's occasionally here too. Yeah, she's trouble.
You've all seen her here.
Yeah, she's trouble,
you
but
can
she's fun.
find the latest episodes of that at bigpicturepod.com. And as a member of the Philadelphia Film Circle, I frequently participate in their Film Scribes podcast. We have a new episode, I think, coming out some point this week. We recorded it yesterday, so should be available sometime soon in the next couple of days. And I am on the socials at Twitter and at Blue Sky. Blue Sky.
I am on Twitter at JW the Movie Guy, Facebook, Threads, and Instagram. So I'm covering all the important ones. You can also find me here every Tuesday night doing this show called Loud Nerdy. Tomorrow night's super fun. We're going to have a lot of NEPA Comic-Con folks on, including a rumor of a Marvel guest that is going to be huge. So anyway, but you can find me at JW the Movie Guy in all those places. You can also find me here every Monday night with my good friend Rich Drees. talking about classic movies. Next week, we got this movie, The Greatest Show on Earth. Thank you for joining us tonight. Everybody have a great week. Go see a movie. I think the only big thing opening this week is Lisa Frankenstein. Next week, you got the Bob Marley movie and Madam Web, so that Sony can hold on to its Spider-Man license. So we'll talk to everybody next week. We'll see everybody next week. Thanks for joining us tonight. Thank you for putting up with me being a little under the weather. Thank God Rich pulled in all the smart things he usually says.